The year is 2025. On this small island just 100 miles off the coast of mainland China, the future of the 21st century could be decided. This is Taiwan, a thriving democracy, a global economic powerhouse, and arguably the most dangerous flashpoint on Earth. For decades, a fragile peace has been held together by diplomatic ambiguity and unspoken threats. But that ambiguity is evaporating. Chinese military pressure on Taiwan is at an all-time high. Naval and air incursions are now a near-daily reality. Beijing has made its intentions clear. Taiwan will be brought under its control, by force if necessary. In response, the United States has deepened its commitment, increasing the presence of military trainers to work with Taiwanese forces on the front lines. The pieces are moving into place for a catastrophic collision between two nuclear-armed superpowers. The world holds its breath, asking a single terrifying question: how close are we to a China-US showdown over Taiwan? To understand what happens next, we first have to understand why it's all happening now. The current crisis isn't the result of a single event. It's a slow-motion avalanche that's been building for years and has now reached a critical point. The political, military, and economic plates are all shifting at once, creating a uniquely volatile environment. Politically, the dynamic shifted with the 2024 inauguration of Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te. His administration, representing the Democratic Progressive Party, stands on a platform that fundamentally rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims. To China, this is an unacceptable challenge to its core One China principle, and it has responded with a relentless campaign of intimidation. Beijing state media and officials openly accuse Taiwan's leaders of stoking war anxiety and pushing their people toward becoming cannon fodder. This political friction is happening against the backdrop of a dramatic military escalation. We aren't just talking about a few extra patrols. We're talking about a sustained, organized, and near-constant military presence. U.S. Indo-Pacific command leaders have described China's massive drills not as exercises, but as dress rehearsals for forced unification. The People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has normalized its operations so much that defense officials believe it can switch from a peacetime posture to a full-scale wartime assault with very little warning. And this is precisely why the United States has made its most significant moves in decades. The decision to increase the number of U.S. military trainers in Taiwan, including U.S. Army Green Berets conducting regular training missions with Taiwanese elite forces, is a seismic shift. While not a permanent basing of combat troops, these rotational trainers are working with Taiwan's amphibious reconnaissance battalions, sharing tactics and operational doctrine. This expanded cooperation is an unmistakable signal. It's a human tripwire. Washington is betting that the risk of harming American personnel will give Beijing pause. But it's a monumental gamble. So you have an intractable political divide, a Chinese military on a permanent war footing, and an increased American training presence on the ground. This is the flashpoint. This is why 2025 is different. But to truly grasp the stakes, we need to break down the three pillars holding up this entire conflict: the terrifying military balance, the world's fragile economic dependence, and the high-stakes political dominoes that could fall. To understand the military dimension of a potential Taiwan conflict is to understand the geography of fear. Look at a map. Taiwan sits at the heart of what military strategists call the first island chain, a string of archipelagos that hem in China's access to the open Pacific Ocean. For Beijing, taking Taiwan isn't just about national pride, it's a strategic necessity to break this containment and project its power globally. For the United States and its allies like Japan and the Philippines, keeping Taiwan out of Beijing's hands is critical to the security of the entire region. For decades, the PLA simply lacked the power to cross the 100-mile-wide Taiwan Strait. That is no longer the case. China has spent the last 30 years building one of the most formidable military forces on the planet, specifically designed for one purpose: to deter American intervention and conquer Taiwan. The centerpiece of this strategy is known as anti-access area denial, or ATUG. Think of it as a giant, multi-layered defensive bubble. This bubble is composed of thousands of missiles. Some, like the DF-26, are nicknamed Guam killers, with a range of 4,000 kilometers, capable of hitting American bases far out in the Pacific. Others, like the DF-21D, are dubbed carrier killers, ballistic missiles that can maneuver in flight to target the crown jewel of American naval power, the aircraft carrier. Add to this a massive navy, now the largest in the world by ship count, a modern air force, and advanced hypersonic missiles that can evade traditional defense systems, and the picture becomes clear. China has built a fortress around its coast designed to make any U.S. intervention incredibly costly and bloody. The PLA's exercises have become chillingly specific. Drills like Joint Sword and the newer Straight Thunder are no longer simple shows of force. They are complex, multi-service operations practicing the exact steps of an invasion or blockade. They simulate precision strikes on key targets, practice joint blockades to cut the island off from the world, and now routinely operate their aircraft carrier groups on the eastern side of Taiwan, demonstrating the ability to impose a full encirclement. But Taiwan is not defenseless. It has spent 70 years preparing for this exact moment. Geographically, it's a defender's dream, a mountainous island with few suitable beaches for a massive amphibious assault. Taiwan's own military strategy, the overall defense concept, is designed to turn the island into a porcupine, making any invasion a painful, protracted nightmare for the PLA. This involves asymmetric warfare, using swarms of small, fast missile boats, sea mines, and mobile anti-ship and anti-air missile launchers hidden in the mountains to wear down an invading force. And this is where the American involvement becomes so crucial. The U.S. Green Berets are training Taiwanese forces in exactly these kinds of tactics, from operating advanced micro-drones like the Black Hornet Nano for reconnaissance to coordinating defensive maneuvers. Beyond that, the U.S. is accelerating the delivery of weapons to Taiwan, including Harpoon anti-ship missiles and F-16 Viper jets. The recent Han Kuang exercises, Taiwan's largest war games, were a testament to this deepening cooperation, focusing on interoperability and joint command. The United States isn't just helping Taiwan, it's repositioning its own forces throughout the region to counter China's A2AD bubble. You have U.S. Marines armed with mobile missile systems deploying to the Philippines for exercises. You have advanced F-22 and F-35 fighter jets operating from bases in Japan and the Philippines. In April 2024, the U.S. deployed its Typhoon missile system to the Philippines for joint drills, a system that has remained in-country and can fire missiles capable of reaching the Chinese mainland. The strategy is clear: create its own A2AD threat to bottle up China's forces. So what would a conflict look like? A full-scale amphibious invasion is the highest risk option for China. Wargames by think tanks like the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, often result in a Pyrrhic victory for the U.S. and Taiwan. They might successfully defend the island, but at the cost of dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and tens of thousands of lives. The U.S. Navy could be crippled for a generation. China's invasion force would be decimated and its economy shattered. A more likely scenario, and one the PLA actively rehearses, is a blockade. By surrounding the island with its Navy and Coast Guard, China could slowly strangle Taiwan economically and politically, daring the U.S. to fire the first shot to break it. This puts Washington in an impossible position: either escalate to a full-blown war or watch as Taiwan is forced to capitulate. The military balance is terrifyingly poised. Both sides have the power to inflict unacceptable damage on the other, creating a situation where the slightest miscalculation could spiral into a global catastrophe. If the military stakes are terrifying, the economic stakes are astronomical. It all comes down to something so small you can barely see it, yet so powerful it runs the entire modern world: the semiconductor. A semiconductor isn't just a component. It's the brain inside every piece of advanced technology we use. Your smartphone, your car, the computer you're watching this on, the servers that run the internet, the world's financial markets, and crucially, the advanced weapon systems that both the US and China rely on. All of them run on semiconductors. And when it comes to making them, Taiwan is the undisputed king. The island produces over 90% of the world's most advanced chips. The ones below 10 nanometers that are essential for AI, high-performance computing, and next-generation military hardware. A single Taiwanese company, TSMC, is more critical to the global economy than any oil field or financial institution. It's a level of market dominance with no historical parallel. This dominance is what's known as the Silicon Shield. For years, the theory was that this shield would protect Taiwan. The logic was simple. If China attacked, it would destroy the very industry it desperately needs for its own technological advancement. A conflict would vaporize the global supply chain, plunging the world into a deep economic depression. The fallout would be so catastrophic that Beijing would never risk it. But in 2025, that logic is beginning to fray. First, China may be calculating that it's better to control a damaged TSMC than to have no access at all. The US has been tightening export controls, trying to cut off China's access to high-end chip technology. From Beijing's perspective, a future where it is permanently technologically inferior to the West is a greater threat than a short-term economic shock. A successful takeover of Taiwan would give China a chokehold on the global tech industry. Second, the world is scrambling to reduce its dependency. The US, Europe, and Japan are pouring billions into building their own semiconductor plants, or fabs. TSMC itself is building massive new facilities in Arizona and Japan. While these efforts will take years to match Taiwan's output, the long-term trend is toward diversification. This might, paradoxically, make Taiwan more vulnerable. As the world becomes less dependent on the Silicon Shield, its power as a deterrent diminishes. Let's imagine for a moment what a blockade or conflict would actually do. Taiwan's IC industry is projected to have an output value of nearly $200 billion in 2025. That flow of chips would stop overnight. Apple couldn't make iPhones. Car manufacturers would shut down production lines. Cloud computing centers that power huge parts of the internet would be unable to expand or replace hardware. NVIDIA, the company at the heart of the AI revolution, relies almost exclusively on TSMC to build its cutting-edge GPUs. The global economy would grind to a halt. Think of it like this. Imagine all the sand needed to make concrete for every construction project in the world came from a single small beach. And now imagine two rival construction giants are about to have a battle on that very beach. That is the situation the world is in with Taiwan and semiconductors. China has already begun to wield its economic leverage. It has placed sanctions on Taiwanese firms and imposed tariffs in a tit-for-tat economic struggle. A conflict would go far beyond that. It wouldn't just be about chips. The Taiwan Strait is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. A huge portion of global trade passes through it. A war would instantly sever these arteries of commerce, sending shockwaves through every sector of the economy. The cost would be measured in the trillions. It is this economic interdependence that has, for so long, been the primary brake on conflict. But as military and political ambitions grow, the question is whether that brake is still strong enough to hold. The third and final pillar is political. The struggle over Taiwan is not just about a piece of territory, it's a battle for the future of the global order. It is a direct confrontation between two fundamentally opposed systems: the democratic world led by the United States and the authoritarian model championed by China. For the Chinese Communist Party, reunification with Taiwan is the final, unfinished chapter of its civil war and a cornerstone of its national legitimacy. Achieving this goal would be a monumental victory for President Xi Jinping, cementing his legacy and validating China's model of authoritarian governance. It would signal that the era of American dominance in Asia is over and a new China-centric order has begun. For the United States, the stakes are just as high. For over 70 years, America's credibility as a global leader has been built on a network of alliances and security guarantees. If the U.S. fails to defend Taiwan, a fellow democracy it is bound by the Taiwan Relations Act to help, that credibility would be shattered. Allies from Tokyo and Seoul to Canberra and Manila would question the value of American promises. The entire American-led security architecture in the Indo-Pacific could unravel. This is why the policy of strategic ambiguity has been the bedrock of U.S. policy for decades. By being deliberately vague about whether it would intervene militarily, Washington aimed to deter both sides, keeping China from invading and keeping Taiwan from declaring formal independence. But many argue this policy has run its course. As China's military power has grown, the ambiguity that once deterred Beijing now seems to be encouraging it. There are growing calls in Washington to move to a policy of strategic clarity, an explicit promise to defend Taiwan, to remove any doubt in Beijing's mind. The political battle is also being fought inside Taiwan. While President Li's administration is resolute, Taiwan's democracy is vibrant and often fractious. Opposition parties that favor closer ties with the mainland sometimes obstruct defense initiatives. Beijing expertly exploits these internal divisions through sophisticated disinformation campaigns, aiming to sow discord, demoralize the public, and portray the ruling party as reckless warmongers. The goal is to win the island without firing a shot by convincing the Taiwanese people that resistance is futile. The international community is caught in the middle. Most countries, including the United States, officially adhere to a One China policy, which acknowledges Beijing's claim without endorsing it. But at the same time, they maintain robust, unofficial relationships with democratic Taiwan. A conflict would force every nation to choose a side. It would split international bodies like the UN and create deep divisions. The Philippines has already stated that due to its proximity and the large number of Filipino citizens in Taiwan, it would inevitably be drawn into any conflict. This is the great political domino effect. The fall of Taiwan wouldn't just be a local event. It would reshape the global balance of power, undermine the credibility of democratic alliances, and potentially set a precedent for other powerful nations to resolve territorial disputes by force. So we stand on the brink. The military, economic, and political forces are all converging on this single point in 2025. What happens next? A full-scale invasion, while the most destructive option, remains the least likely for now. The cost for China would be staggering, not just in military losses, but in complete economic and diplomatic isolation. Xi Jinping would be gambling his nation's entire future on a single roll of the dice. A blockade remains a much more plausible and perhaps more dangerous scenario. It is a gray zone tactic that blurs the line between peace and war. It would test American resolve in the most difficult way possible, forcing a choice between firing the first shot in a potential World War III or abandoning a democratic partner. The PLA has already demonstrated its capability to enforce such a quarantine. But perhaps the greatest danger of all is not a premeditated war, but a war of miscalculation. With so many warships, fighter jets, and drones from both sides operating in such close proximity, the risk of an accidental collision or a misunderstanding spiraling out of control is higher than ever. What happens if a Chinese jet pilot gets too aggressive and collides with a U.S. surveillance plane? What if a nervous commander on a Taiwanese vessel misinterprets a Chinese Coast Guard maneuver and opens fire? In this hypertense environment, a single mistake could ignite the entire powder keg. The path forward is a razor's edge. Deterrence is the name of the game. For the United States and Taiwan, the goal is to make the cost of aggression so transparently high that Beijing never concludes that force is a viable option. For China, the goal is to use the threat of its military power to coerce Taiwan into political submission without having to actually fight. So, how close is a China-US showdown? The honest answer is that no one knows for sure, but we are closer now than at any point in the last 50 years. The guardrails that have kept the peace for decades are eroding. Strategic ambiguity is giving way to a dangerous tactical clarity. We have a terrifying military balance where both sides are capable of inflicting devastating losses on the other. We have a global economy that is utterly dependent on a tiny island, turning the silicon shield into a potential doomsday device. And we have an immense political struggle where the credibility of the world's two greatest powers is on the line. There are still powerful deterrents to war. The economic consequences would be mutual and assuredly catastrophic. The human cost would be immense. For these reasons, many analysts believe the standoff will continue, a tense, unstable, and deeply dangerous peace. But the risk of miscalculation grows with every passing day, with every fighter jet that screams across the median line, and with every warship that cuts through the waters of the Taiwan Strait. The peace is fragile, the stakes are global, and the world watches, hoping that the leaders in Washington, Beijing, and Taipei truly understand the catastrophic price of getting it wrong.